Okay, so we're going to pick up where we left off yesterday. So if you remember yesterday, we talked a little bit about um, the setup of the fair and how the Philadelphia World Expo was going to be handled, and we looked briefly at the theme of technology industry and um, just the cool stuff that America had to offer that other countries were impressed with. So let's look a little bit some of the other stuff with the themes. So the theme of um, land, which encompasses a broad spectrum of things, including art and culture. So this is not an American thing, but it was something really cool at the fair. It was France's 100th birthday gift to America, the Statue of Liberty. Yeah, I know it's just an arm, but for 50 cents, you could go up in the top of it and, look around out of the top of the arm with the promise that eventually you'll get the rest of the statue. But, it was cool that France gave us a giant arm for our birthday, that the rest of it would come, you know, piece by piece. And as somebody pointed out in another class, at least it wasn't the feet. Bananas. I think it's really hard for us to imagine this because of the culture that we live in now. But in the 1870s, most Americans had never had a banana. The tropical fruits were too hard to get to America and keep them fresh. But by 1876, developments in um, cooling technology and as well as the connections with countries closer to us that could grow bananas resulted in thousands and thousands of bananas being available at the fair to try. And Americans, pardon the pun, went bananas for them. They absolutely loved them. And it really fueled a growing desire for these kind of products and the availability of those products for the vast majority of Americans. Now, I love myself a banana because bananas are amazing. I also love root beer. 1876 World Expo is the introduction of the first mass market soda in America. Now, before 1876, there had been sodas in America, but most of them were regionally made and available only like in small areas where you may have been. Also, unlike modern soda, they were all naturally derived from stuff like, real sugar and natural flavorings. A man named Edward Hires, who was a Philadelphia pharmacist, paid $5,000 for a license to sell his root beer at the fair. Now, a couple of interesting things about the root beer. Um, Number one, root beer was marketed. It was now realize it was made by a pharmacist. It was marketed as health food and medicine. If you had an upset tummy, if you couldn't go potty correctly, if you were having digestive problems, if you were sick, root beer was sold to you as an answer. And Hires gave out small sample cups of root beer. And if you liked it, you could go and buy a root beer for 5 cents out of these ice filled barrels and get some really nummy, tasty root beer. Or maybe even better, for 25 cents, you could buy a small glass bottle that you could take at home and make your own root beer. So I want you to sort of just keep this in mind. Number one, remember, it's marketed as health food and medicine, not as a casual drink. It also, by the way, the name root beer is partly derived from the fact that it was meant to be an alternative to regular beer. Um, which when we get to the Prohibition era, we'll talk about. Root beer caused quite a controversy there. But even at 25 cents a little bottle and at 5 cents a cup, Hires made over $100,000 at the fair. The root beer was so popular that other pharmacies along the East Coast and into the Midwest began ordering root beer to be delivered to them so that they could sell it. It became the first mass market soda in America. So we have the 1876 World's Fair to thank for that. Ketchup. Without even me saying it, you can probably guess. Ketchup was the contribution of a local Pittsburgh family known as the Heinz family. They marketed um, condiments or dressings for food, and ketchup was introduced to America as well as the fair. My own personal favorite of the food items besides the banana, buttered popcorn. The Native Americans had introduced popcorn to the Europeans. There's a certain breed of corn that, when it was dried out, retained moisture inside the kernels. And when heated, that moisture would expand and explode, creating the crunchy, tasty little white interiors that we all know and love. But it took an American to come up with the idea of melting butter and putting on top of it. God bless America. That's just amazing. Buttered popcorn introduced at the fair. Also, kind of a weird one we don't really think about, but landscape architecture. So, landscape architecture had existed before. If you went to Europe, the big royal estates and the houses of the wealthy and the aristocratic had elaborate gardens. But what the landscape, the fair introduced was the concept to America that landscaping could be done by anybody. And the middle class could have landscaped homes set up very strategically, very organized, very calming. I think the modern term would be like very feng shui. It was all very integrated and seamless. And you could do that for your own houses and your own yards. As the regular middle class American, you didn't need some wealthy person to do it. 25 separate states had their own display buildings at the fair. So, like, the one that really sticks out to me is the Iowa building, where you would walk in and they had these giant, like, 10-gallon glass containers full of corn from every single county in Iowa. Why the heck you need to see like 50 varieties of corn? It's corn. It's all going to look the same. But nevertheless, you could go do that. And you could see corn from Des Moines. You could see corn from Jefferson County. You could see corn from Davenport, because who doesn't want to see Davenport corn, I ask you? Exhibits of America flora and fauna. So both horticulture, that's natural plants like sagegrass, the cactuses, flowering plants, agriculture, the edible plants and products that America had to offer. Fauna is the animal life of America, as well as just a celebration of the fact that America is a giant country and it expands over this huge area with all of these different ecosystems and all these different land types. This last part here, the centennial. Um, there's a quote from an American author named William Dean Howells. No one can see the fair without a thrill of patriotic pride. This is really what the organizers of the fair were looking for. It doesn't it doesn't focus on just the North. It doesn't just focus on the South. It doesn't talk about the disagreements between us. It doesn't point out the technological differences, the economic differences, the industrial capacity. It does nothing like that. It simply points out that this is America in all of its differences, in all of its diversity, in all of its amazing wonder. And it really drove home the point that North or South, Yankee or Reb, you know, Western cowboy or Eastern dude, it didn't matter. You're all Americans. The planners of the fair wisely made no references to the Civil War, with the exception of a statue put up in honor of the emancipation and the end of slavery. But there's no talk about the battles. There's no talk about who won or lost. There's nothing like that. The focus was on what America was and what America was going to be. It really was looking back to lend itself to what it would be like in the future. You know, there were historical recreations. So you could go into an area and, like, this is Philadelphia in 1776. This is Philadelphia in 1800. This is Philadelphia in 1820. Going through the different stages of what America would look like. And they had people dressed up at the time doing recreation and historical reenactments of things. You could try foods from the periods, look at the kind of clothing that they wore, and see how things had changed and developed over the time. And despite the fact they didn't want to pay for anything, the government had their own display building with 7 different departments inside, showing how the government did its job during the peace times and during wartime. There was an entire display of American Indian culture. Yes, despite the fact that we were fighting and killing American Indians, we valued their culture and recognized that it had something valuable and unique to offer. Also, there was a display from the National Museum, the Smithsonian, where you could see really cool, weird stuff that the Smithsonian would have there to look. Now, I did not skip this on purpose, so don't take this like the Women's Pavilion, the first and only building dedicated to women at any of these fairs. All things womanly, except we don't talk about that voting issue. That's a no-no. No suffrage. That's the technical term for voting, by the way. Suffrage, not suffering. Suffrage. I saved that for last because I want you to look at this picture and just ponder this for a second. Now, the women's building is set up directly behind the government building, across from the display of one of the executive departments, the Department of War. So as you walk out of the women's building, there are cannons pointed at you. Not really quite sure what that says. I just personally find it ironic and funny. But inside this building, there are displays set up for things that they felt would appeal to women at the time. New household inventions and appliances, foods you could do, clothing you could make, how the sewing machine could be used, what you could do with a typewriter. Now, the interesting thing here is that even though they don't talk about voting, they do address the issue of women running businesses from their homes, being entrepreneurs, and incorporating themselves into the job force. Excuse me, which in and of itself is kind of a revolutionary idea, but it is the cutting edge for women's rights and advancements at the time. So tomorrow, or on Monday, I should say, when we get back, we will look at sort of like what other countries brought to America, because other countries have an impact on America too. It's not just, and by the way, again, the whole fear of America being embarrassed, we weren't embarrassed. Other countries showed up and are like, wow, America's got it going on. That's pretty cool. And as we'll talk about a little bit in our next class, it actually has a really interesting effect on our relationship with England. Okay, thanks a lot for everything. Have a lovely time. Peace and love.